In this video, I'm going to be comparing the Wizarding World franchise to the Star Trek franchise. This is a pretty interesting one for me because, on the one hand, I've been familiar with the Wizarding World for a long time now, for years. At this point, many years. I first started getting into Wizarding World when I was younger. I've read all the books multiple times. I have the books in my room. In fact, I remember when me and my dad actually read together the first book, Sorcerer's Stone. I think we read all of the second book, Chamber of Secrets, as well, if I remember right. I've seen all the 8 Harry Potter movies that are based on the 7 books from J.K. Rowling. I actually watched the first Fantastic Beast movie in theaters with my dad, and then I actually saw Fantastic Beasts Secrets of Dumbledore in theaters with a friend of mine. I have not seen Crimes of Grindelwald. I have not read Cursed Child, but I definitely have a lot of nostalgia for Wizarding World. When it comes to Star Trek, this is actually a franchise that I've only started getting into within the last couple years. Before then, I was somewhat aware of Star Trek. I had seen one of the movies before at Boy Scout camp, but then I didn't see any of the others. Of course, I had, heard things about Star Trek, but it was only within the last 2-3 years that I actually really started getting into the franchise. Now I actually have seen all the 13 movies, along with a lot of seasons of television, more so than any other franchise, easily. At this point, I've seen every season of The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Keep in mind, they all have 7 seasons. Also, at this point, I have watched all 5 seasons of Star Trek Discovery. When I was initially going through Star Trek television, it was only the first 4 seasons of Discovery that had been released, and then more recently, I watched season 5. I've seen 4 seasons of Lower Decks. I'm definitely going to watch season 5 when that one comes out. I have seen the original animated TV show at this point, along with the original live action show. The live action show is 3 seasons, whereas the animated show only has 2 seasons. I've also seen both of the seasons of Strange New Worlds that have been released, along with the 3 seasons of Picard that have come out. And finally, I've seen season 1 of Star Trek Prodigy. I have not yet gotten around to season 2 of Prodigy. I definitely plan on watching that season. I've just been watching other things. Now, when it comes to the highest Rotten Tomatoes score for each franchise, in the case of Wizarding World, the highest score is a 96% for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. In the case of Star Trek, the highest score is a 94% for the 2009 film directed by J.J. Abrams. Wizarding World wins here. Then we look at lowest score. In the case of Wizarding World, what I think is pretty impressive is that at this point, you've got 11 movies in total. Only 2 of them are rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, that being Crimes of Grindelwald and Secrets of Dumbledore. The lowest score is a 36% for Crimes of Grindelwald, which doesn't at all surprise me. In the case of Star Trek, unsurprisingly, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, the second to last of that original run of movies with Kirk and Spock, has the lowest score of only 23%. Wizarding World wins here. Then when you look at average score, Wizarding World has an average of 75, while Star Trek has an average score of 69. When you look at gap between lowest and highest score, in the case of Wizarding World, you got a gap of 60. In the case of Star Trek, you have a gap of 71. So Wizarding World wins again, meaning Wizarding World is already going to win this debate regardless of my personal opinion. But let's look at it now. Which franchise do I prefer? And this is a really interesting one because I think that Star Trek has been very consistent when it comes to their TV shows. Specifically, I think they've been able to keep the quality up. But pretty much any Star Trek fan out there will agree that the films have not been as consistent. I think the first movie, the motion picture that came out back in 1979, has some good things about it, but it just feels really off, as honestly, I think it feels a lot more like 2001: A Space Odyssey rather than Star Trek. It's just a really slow movie that I don't think is as interesting. Wrath of Khan is, of course, great. I think Search for Spock is a great sequel to Wrath of Khan, and then I really enjoy Voyage Home. It's just a really fun, entertaining movie that works well as this fish out of water story. But then you get Final Frontier, which has visuals that haven't aged very well, has a plot that's pretty silly about trying to find God. And then, admittedly, Undiscovered Country is, I would say, a really good way to conclude that original run of movies. It's a great send off for Kirk, Spock, and all the other characters. But then you got Generations, movie number 7, which I think is not as strong. There are certainly moments in the movie that I enjoy, for sure. There are character interactions that are really good, characters that are very interesting, but then it feels like we're using a fan fiction-esque gimmick to bring Kirk in there so you can have Kirk and Picard interacting with each other, which is cool to see, don't get me wrong, but then we kill off Kirk. That feels weird. And then First Contact, I think, is great. Its introduction to the Borg in the movies. That one works really well. But then you get Insurrection and Nemesis, which I think are not as good. With Insurrection, I mean, sure, I enjoy seeing this new community that we didn't know about before. They're just very peaceful, serene, calm. But overall, doesn't feel like that much really happens. So there are moments in there that I enjoy, but it's not really that strong. And then Nemesis focuses a lot on the action, not a lot on the story and characters. I think it's definitely one of the weaker ones. And then J.J. Abrams did a good job with the 2009 film, because that one is a much more accessible version of Star Trek by modern standards. It has action that's thrilling, as an engaging, compelling story. I like the journey for Kirk in this movie. I think the visuals here are really good. And then Into Darkness is a slick production, yes, but to me it's just too much of a clone of Wrath of Khan. And also, I think at this point they really got the character of Kirk wrong, because when you get to Into Darkness and even Beyond as well, they just make Kirk out to be Maverick from Top Gun. I'm thinking, that's not who Kirk actually is. That's a pretty big misunderstanding of the character. This stands out to me the most in Into Darkness, where you have a Kirk that just goes against his superiors, disobeys orders, isn't willing to accept responsibility or accountability for his own actions, is always blaming someone else, and then is surprised when there's consequences for his actions. That doesn't at all sit right with me. Then in Beyond, which is a movie that I actually like overall, I think it's one of the good ones. It's a fun, entertaining movie. But at the beginning, you have Kirk talking about how he doesn't like being a captain. And I'm going, you're not understanding the character of Captain Kirk at all. Because Kirk really enjoys being a captain. That's a big part of his character. That being a captain gives him purpose. That's what he's good at. And they missed it here. When it comes to Wizarding World, I think Chris Columbus did a good job of introducing us to this world and these characters. I think with Harry Potter, Ron, Hermione, all these other characters, along with all the locations we see, Hogwarts, Gringotts, the Diagon Alley, Ministry of Magic, all these things combined together to create a world, an environment, a set of characters that you enjoy spending time with, that are just really interesting, really engaging. Sure, in the first movie, the actual plot about the Sorcerer's Stone feels more like an afterthought, but what that movie's primarily trying to do is just to set the tone, give you a feel of what the Wizarding World is like. I think it does a really good job of that. Of course, John Williams is one of the best composers out there. He does a great job with the score for these early Harry Potter movies. The score really gives you that sense of wonder and awe of the wizarding world, that sense of whimsy, a sense of playfulness that you get early on, which obviously goes away as the movies go on, because the movies, of course, get darker and heavier, so you lose that playfulness as things get much more serious. I think that Alfonso Cuarón did a good job with Prisoner of Azkaban. Sure, it definitely feels jarring that there is such a big shift from the first two movies to Prisoner of Azkaban. It does admittedly feel weird that suddenly the tone is incredibly different, that it's both darker but also goofier than the first two movies at the same time. Even the way things look, Hogwarts looks dramatically different in Prisoner of Azkaban than it does in Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets. That is one of the big reasons why I think overall the books do work better. They are just more consistent because one person was making the books rather than the movies where you had four different directors doing them. But still, I think Prisoner of Azkaban works. And then I think Order of the Phoenix does a really good job of taking the longest book and making it the shortest movie, giving us much more the Cliff Notes version of the story. Sure, there are some things that you miss from the book because the movie Order of the Phoenix is short, like the final explanation at the end goes by so quickly in the movie. Okay, it's a disappointment to me, but I still think the movie works. And with Goblet of Fire, yeah, I will say that when you get to the end and you see, oh, the maze, it doesn't have any of the creatures that are in the book. It's just, a maze that attacks people. Okay, that's a disappointment. And I think that having the dragon chase Harry around the school was excessive. It's like, really? Why do we need to turn this into a big extended action scene where the dragon gets loose and is chasing Harry all over the school? This is much more simple in the book. It's just Harry flies upward with his boom and then he swoops down and just snatches the egg rather than the dragon getting loose, breaking the chain off so it can then chase Harry all over the place. But still, I think that Goblet of Fire isn't that bad. And then I think Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows Part 1 are definitely the weaker movies in this run right here. Because when you look at Half-Blood Prince, I think the movie focuses too much on the romantic drama between the kids. So it doesn't focus enough on Voldemort's backstory, the mystery of the Half-Blood Prince. So for this movie, I'm thinking, filmmakers, can we please spend more time showing Tom Riddle Voldemort's backstory? That's what I'm more interested in. And because the movie spends so little time on the mystery of the Half-Blood Prince, when you get the reveal at the end, it just falls flat. And also, I get the filmmakers here are trying to show you visually that the world is getting darker because Voldemort is gaining power, and so things are getting more and more serious. But I think the problem with the movie is that it looks just not visually pleasing at all. It just looks so drab, mute, desaturated, devoid of color, that's just frankly ugly to look at. And then with Deathly Hallows Part 1, I think the problem here is that the movie feels so much like a part 1, so much like all the setup without any of the payoff. So there are good moments in here, 100%, powerful moments between the characters, but not really that much happens. It's like Harry, Ron, and Hermione go off camping for most of the movie. And Deathly Hallows Part 2 is a fantastic conclusion to the Harry Potter saga. And actually, when it comes to Goblet of Fire, I do like how it shows that our kids are growing up, that they're becoming teenagers, and so they're realizing that they actually have romantic interest. I like seeing the Yule Ball. So I think that Goblet of Fire overall works, though there are certainly issues with it. It's not my favorite of the Harry Potter movies. When it comes to Fantastic Beasts, I mean, I like the first one well enough. It definitely has its issues, like a tonal inconsistency of both having a movie that's about Newt trying to track down his magical creatures and also about this boy being abused. That's obviously much darker than the much more whimsical side of the story that's new, trying to track down his magical creatures. I haven't seen Crimes of Grindelwald, and then I saw Secrets of Dumbledore and thought, oh, this is actually an interesting direction to go in. It's like a political thriller set in the wizarding world. Overall, I would personally choose the I'm gonna say the Wizarding World franchise. Just because the movies are more consistent, I have more nostalgia for it. That'll wrap things up for this video.